Hello, and welcome to the Designing with Love podcast. I am your host, Jackie Pellegrin, where my goal is to bring you information, tips, and tricks as an instructional designer. Hello, instructional designers and educators. Welcome to episode 90 of the Designing with Love podcast. I'm thrilled to have Connie Malamed with me today. Connie helps learning professionals advance their careers by building skills and visibility. She is the founder of the learning community, Mastering Instructional Design, and publisher of the e-learning coach website and podcast. She is also the author of Visual Design Solutions and Visual Language for Designers. Connie publishes a monthly newsletter for learning designers with articles, resources, and freebies, which I'll make sure to link in the show notes. Welcome to the show, Connie.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Jackie.
I appreciate it. From one instructional designer to the other and one podcaster to the other, it's wonderful to be able to have that community and be able to share that knowledge. So I love that. So as you know, a lot of my listeners are newbies. They're new in instructional design, or they're in education. They're looking to transition to this field because it's such a growing field. So to help us kind of start off that conversation, I want to kind of start with those first steps. So if someone's brand new to this field of instructional design, what would you have them do in the first maybe 30 to 60 days, such as one skill to build, one portfolio piece to make, and maybe one quick way to get feedback?
I think people get a little hung up in the tools and often think that instructional design equals e-learning. And the reality is, when you're a practicing instructional designer, you may create participation manuals, you may create facilitator manuals, you may write video scripts, you may create a website with learning portals, which doesn't happen as much, but it should. You might create job aids. So you really need a very good understanding of how people learn before you dive into the tools, because otherwise it just doesn't make sense. It's not going to have as much meaning. But once you really understand how people learn, then you have more of a sense of how to design and develop. And then you can start playing around with the tools.
I love that. Yes. You can't really master the tools until you know how they're going to work best for people and how it's going to help them learn, because that's what we're in the business of doing. We're not just here to input. I've heard that so many times, that I'm just the one to input the content and then it just does it on its own. And I'm like, no, that's not really how it works, right? We have to we're the architects of learning, but we also help to drive that success and that growth. And so that's amazing. I love that.
It's pretty similar to for anyone who's a teacher. They don't just walk in to the classroom and read what the textbook says. They're constantly thinking about the students and how will the students best learn. It's the same thing in adult learning. One time I read, our brain is not a recorder. And I love that because people who aren't in education or any kind of learning profession, they think they could just throw everything at people and they're going to remember it. And it's just doesn't work that way.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of all the theories that we learn about, right? If we do go for formal education, and I'm sure you teach this in your classes about cognitive load theory, and that's been coming up a lot in my classes. And I've been reminding my coworkers that are curriculum developers or instructional designers about that, because it's so important not to just do an info dump on our learners and just expect them to catch it all, right? Or understand it. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I think that the limitations of working memory, which is what causes high cognitive load when you tax your working memory too much, is really almost the most important element of instructional design. It's just so important to understand how limited our processing power is, within every moment.
Right. That's so true. Definitely. So kind of building off that momentum of newcomers, from what you've seen, what are 3 specific moves that you think can help newcomers break in the fastest, especially without going back to school? Because some may not be able to go back to school right away, but they want to come into this career.
Well, there are a lot of professional degrees that you can get, professional certifications. There are a lot of communities. I have one called Mastering Instructional Design, but there are many others. From what I can tell, they seem like they're good, because we're a caring group of professionals, who want to help people do a good job. So the other thing is just to teach yourself. For example, I always recommend my friend Julie Dirkson's book, Design for How People Learn. It's a classic. It really helps you get started with understanding. I think another thing people can do is to find what their unique talents are. And there's this term called talent stacking. I have an article about it on the elearningcoach.com website. And talent stacking is looking at your individual unique skills and stacking them together so that you're kind of different than everyone else. So I think that's kind of a cool idea. And then another thing is to possibly find an area or two that really interests you, such as accessibility, visual design, AI, video, whatever it is, and really dive into that so that can be, your specialty. Not that you'll be exclusive. You do need to know a lot of things, a lot of areas. But I rely on other people to have expertise or a lot of competence in other areas, because it's impossible to learn it all. It's such as we were talking, it's a giant Venn diagram.
Right, exactly. It's so true. And that's why I love having guests like you on the show, because everyone brings a unique perspective and unique insight to this field. And as educators and instructional designers, we've just, and so I even had a guest on my show not too long ago that we talked about inclusive design. We talked about neurodivergent learners, and it really opened up my eyes to that. And I thought, I need to bring this back to my team, because she said 1 in 5 learners are neurodivergent. And I thought, oh my goodness, that means we're not tapping into some of those learners if we're not, doing that and recognizing what their needs are. Then I had another guest that was talking about Gen Alpha in that generation, and she opened up my eyes to that. And so I was like, wow, this is really expanding my wheelhouse, right? And my insights and my knowledge. So I love being able to bring those diverse sets of perspectives and experiences, and it's great. I love it. Yeah.
We have monthly speakers, and we also had a speaker that could have been the same one to talk about neurodivergence, because I needed my eyes opened up to it. Even though I grew up with a brother who was like that, now they know so much more, and we can accommodate it so much more easily.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that's so true. I love that. And you talked a little bit about visuals, and your 2 books are about that. So since clear visuals help us to make learning click, I wanted to kind of talk about that as well, because some of our early instructional designers, or some that are new to the field, may not understand how visual design is so important. And I actually did a PD years ago with one of my colleagues about visual design and how important that is. So it's really great. And we referenced your books, so it's wonderful. So drawing on your 2 books, Visual Design Solutions and Visual Language for Designers, what's a simple checklist that a beginner could use to make their next slide or their screen easier to learn from?
And I do actually have a checklist, but so I'll give you that link.
Great.
But let's start from the beginning. There are more resources devoted to vision for sighted individuals than to any other sense. So that's one reason it's so important for learning. The other thing is, and this is theory, dual coding theory, which says that if you use both channels, visual and audio, or audio, you will be able to get information, processed in 2 different ways, which is stronger than just using one channel. So those are some of the reasons why visuals are so important. And as far as a checklist goes, one really important thing to remember to help you feel more confident is that you do not need to be able to draw or to render to be good at visual design. Visual design is very functional and utilitarian. And You even can't even be too clever, which is kind of disappointing when you want to be, wild and clever. You really have to think in terms of learning and clarity. So you don't want to fill up every space. In terms of a checklist, you want to have enough white space, which is the space between the graphics and between the letters and words and sentences. So, and it doesn't have to be white. So you want to have enough white space so that people can process the visual information. You want to make sure that your color combinations are okay for people who may have color blindness. And there's another word for that. Do you remember what it is?
Hello, I have some exciting news to share with all of my listeners. There is a feature called Fan Mail. What this allows you to do is send me a text message anytime during the episode. There's a link located at the top of the description in each episode, and it says Send Jackie a Text Message. So when you click on that link, you'll be able to send me a message letting me know what you thought about the episode and if you have any ideas for future episode content as well. I look forward to seeing your text messages. Thank you. I don't remember what it is either. I was talking about accessibility the other day with somebody, and that came up. Yeah, and I couldn't remember either. Yeah.
Okay. It'll come up in the middle of the night when you're...
Probably, yeah.
And you never want to use color as the only indicator, because for people with color vision deficiency, that's what it's called, they may not see that. It may look almost like typically it's red and green, and on occasion blue and yellow. It can look kind of grayish to them or brownish to them. So those are a few things. Other things are you don't try not to use too many fonts. You can find one font that has multiple styles. And, by multiple styles, I mean it has a regular or Roman. It has bold. It may have black, which is very thick. It may have thin, which you probably rarely want to use. It's going to have italics. So if you're not really expert at visual design or graphic design, I would just stick with one font. I know it's hard. And let me give one more. Alignment. That's a good one.
Oh, yes.
When you're looking at your graphics and they don't look great, just start aligning things horizontally, vertically, and it'll make it look much neater. And don't forget, your goal is to have people learn, and it's not for them to compliment your great design.
Right, that's true. Yeah, the fanciness is not what really counts, right? It's getting to the heart of the learning and what it is that they really need to do that so they can go to their next job or their next whatever it is they're looking to do and advance in that. Yeah, I love that. It made me think of Canva has this color wheel tool that's really great for that, for visual design, and you can pick your primary and complement, and it'll give you a good complementary color that goes with that on the color wheel. So I love that because it's a digital tool, and I'm like, wow, and you don't even need to be a member of Canva to do that. So when I did my episode on the solo one on accessibility, that's coming out a little bit before this one, I shared that. So it's really a fun tool. I like using that. And then you can also do the other different types of combinations too. So it's a great tool. I always send my students to, I'm like, here, if you're not sure, here's a really good tool that you can utilize. Yeah.
And the funny thing is you don't need too many colors. You need a primary color that you're going to be using, a complementary to highlight things, a few others to make it a little bit more interesting, like a neutral background. And you don't want to have crazy backgrounds. You're always thinking about how will it be for people to process this visual information. Visual cues are important too. Pointing things out to people helps them process it more quickly. So if you have an arrow or a highlight, use those if it makes sense.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting too how visual design complements the multimedia design principles really well, because we have, like you talked about, making sure that things line up, and that kind of lines up with, all the different principles within Mayer's 12 multimedia principles. So it's interesting how my students will make those connections and, oh, I see some of that related. And I'm like, yes. Yeah, it's really neat. Yeah, I love that. Some of them, actually will reference that, and they'll be like, yes, I used Mayer's 12 principles and I used visual. And I'm like, oh, you did both. Great. I love that. So once they become conscious of it and aware of it, it just becomes part of what you do. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's great. So you and I, we both have been working in the field for a while. So we're veterans, right? So we know putting our work out there can feel awkward at first. And I know sometimes even I still feel a little awkward about it sometimes, but I think I've gotten past that most of the time. But what do you think is an easy plan for a first portfolio? Maybe one mini project to create, where to share it, and a weekly habit to get in front of the right people?
In terms of portfolios, we have a portfolio course in my community, and I recommend people showing that you can go through an entire I keep saying visual design instead of instructional design, that you can go through an entire instructional design cycle. So put in, first of all, start with a scenario that's relevant to where you want to work. So you may not know what area, but you may know if you want to work in ed tech, higher ed, or in workplace training. That includes government, corporations, associations. This is how I categorize it. And choose a pretty neutral topic that people can relate to and that is politically okay, because that changes with, the times. Come up with something that allows you to show that you're helping people improve their work performance. Or if it's for students, like at K through 12, you're helping the students learn and improve their performance. And then show that you can go through the entire cycle. So go through an analysis and put that in your portfolio. And you may have to make this up, but that's okay. Because you're not really interviewing people. If you can really interview people, that would be great. And get the content, analyze it, do an audience analysis, come up with some level of design and prototype. And if you can, if it's e-learning or if it's a manual, show a finished product, that's even best. So I would just show that you can do the entire cycle. And even if you use a process that's a little bit different than someone else, I think it's okay. It just shows that you understand the full instructional design world. So that's what I would put into a portfolio. That one, if you're only going to have one project, show it from start to finish. Yes. If you can somehow volunteer somewhere and put it in the real world, that would be even better. Do your students get a chance to volunteer and do that?
They do, yes. And one of the requirements in the master's program at GCU is that they build a portfolio and they put artifacts in it, like you mentioned, and projects that they're working on. And a lot of their projects, they have to go through the whole ADDIE model process, like you said, the whole process. And they have that opportunity to do that needs analysis and be able to implement it, test it out, with learners. So it's really fun. And then some of my students have done that. They've volunteered or they've done internships just on the side, whether it's most of the time it's not paid for, but gives them that opportunity, like you said, to get out there and do that. So yeah, it's really neat. Yes, absolutely.
One thing that I like to add to the ADDIE process, which maybe they're doing in a lot of schools or organizations nowadays, is to pull some things from user experience design or marketing and put that in. And one is to add personas to your audience analysis and perhaps empathy maps, and to add prototyping. So there are things that we can grab from other fields that make the ADDIE model even more rich and robust. And I'd like to add those too.
Yes, those are great. I love that. And that's something that my students get to practice with, that you mentioned, the empathy mapping, journey mapping, prototyping. Yeah. So it's really great to see that our program at GCU is on top of that, because I didn't learn those when I was in my master's. I graduated from Walden in 2013, and we didn't do empathy mapping, journey mapping, prototyping that I remember. So when I started teaching, Connie, it was funny because I thought, what is this? I mean, I have my other, I have an MBA as well. So I got my business degree, I have a business background, but we didn't do empathy or journey mapping then either. So I was like, what is this? This is new to me. So it was really, really funny and so I had to actually, as an instructor, go out and do a little bit more research about it and practice doing some myself. But then I discovered that Canva has some empathy and journey maps in there. And I was like, oh, so it really helped me to learn, okay, this is what it's about. And once I started seeing my students produce the work, it all clicked with me. I was like, I get it now. That's amazing. So as an instructor, even in the field for a long time, I learned some great information on that. So it's great.
Since I had my first job, or even when I was in school, I immediately got interested in user interface design and user experience design. And there's a lot that we can pull from those fields, one being a subset of the other sometimes, because they seem to, experiment and come up with things perhaps more quickly than we do. Although things are, we're getting pretty good at that now too, changing, being able to change. And then there's a new book out, Train Like a Marketer, or some by Bianca Bowman and Mike Taylor. And they bring in, a lot of nice marketing tricks and techniques that are good for instructional design. So our field is it overlaps with almost everything,
Right. It does. Yeah. It's amazing. Like my marketing degree and my MBA have really helped me in this field, because I've been able, like you mentioned, with the empathy mapping and journey mapping, and in marketing, it's all about understanding the customer, right? And understanding the client. But in this case, we have to do that too. We have to we work with stakeholders, we work with subject matter experts, and being able to understand where they're coming from, and having that empathy, I think, is so important, right? In this field too.
Yeah. I agree.
Yes. And then, educators, I would say probably 80% of my students are in K through 12 education. So those that listen to this that are in my classes or have been in my classes, they'll know who they are. But it's very interesting, because I noticed this was a while ago, Connie, and it brought some attention to me. One of my students, when he graduated, he was on my podcast, but he talked about his experience in creating his portfolio and going out there and actually using it as a marketing tool to get jobs. And he said, well, I'm a K through 12 educator. I want to go into corporate instructional design. And so I said, okay, well, try to see how you can create those artifacts that are not just K through 12 education, but diversify your portfolio. And he realized that as he started going out and trying to get jobs, that they were like, do you have any examples of corporate? And he realized he made the, assumption that, I'm just going to work on projects that I'm familiar with. And so I tell my students that all the time, try to diversify. But I love that idea of having, that whole cycle. If it's just one project, make sure you go through that whole cycle. But I always let my students know, if you're going to have multiple types of artifacts, diversify if you can. It really helps in that area.
I mean, in some cases, I don't think this is true in all cases, but in some cases, I would just leave out anything, unless you want a job in K through 12, in ed tech, an educational publisher. I would completely take out anything that has to do with K through 12, because there are some people in the world of workplace training that they just don't want to see, cute pictures or flowers and horses. They really want to see the things that you would do for an adult.
Right. Exactly.
Not always.
Not always.
Some people are compassionate about that, and they understand that the skills are very parallel.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I've had some of my students that will work on projects, and it's really great when they work on something that, like, for example, financial planning or budgeting or something like that. And I'm like, that's great. I love that, because even though they're a K through 12 educator, they recognize that need to be able to do something that will benefit their community. And I was like, wow, you hit the nail on the head. You've got it. They made that connection and thought, okay, I need to really get out there and even if it's just like with family members, I even tell them that. I'm like, if it's just with family and friends, do something, right, that can really benefit your community. And it does. But I love that idea of volunteering too, and getting into a community, whether it's your church or somewhere where you volunteer on a regular basis, and seeing where those needs are and where they could benefit from that. So yeah,
that reminds me of a woman I was helping and with her portfolio, and her son was in the Boy Scouts, so she made a little bit older. And they were going on these big hikes. So she made an e-learning course for Cub Scout leaders for how to take children on a hike, or how to do some more advanced hiking skills and camping skills. And I just thought that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. It was in her community, and they were thrilled that she was doing that, and she was helping people out, and at the same time creating something for adults.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, so it served so many purposes. So yeah, that's great. I love that. And it shows, as instructional designers, our creativity and our innovation, right? Because we want to have that creativity and that innovation that we can bring to the community and bring to learners at large. So I think that's great when we can intersect the two. Yeah, that's great.
I look at a lot of portfolios, and I do want to give people a little tip. One of the true, signs of a beginner's portfolio is that their e-learning is more of a page turner. In other words, you could turn it into a PDF document and it would be the same thing. So what you really want to do is take advantage of the medium and make it highly interactive. And interactive doesn't mean clicking on something to reveal text. Interactive means that you're using the medium to help people learn, to take them on an adventure or a challenge, or to simulate something real, to start off with a story or a challenge or a game, to just draw people in quickly. And that, to me, when you start with just a boring list of objectives, and then it's next, it's just a sign of a beginner.
Right. That's so true. Yeah, that reminds me of something I try to do in all of my materials as well, and bring that interactivity into it to where it's meaningful, right? And it's not one of my coworkers, she said, we don't want to just make eye candy. I said, you're right. We don't want to just make eye candy. We want to make it meaningful and purposeful. So I think that's so important. Yeah, I love that.
Sometimes you have to click to reveal simply because you have limited real estate. And I've had, I've done a lot of medical e-learning, and I had a doctor say to me once, please don't make us quick to look at the text. It was just so funny, but I had to because there wasn't enough room. But I tried to make it exciting, too.
Yes.
And, let me just say this too. It's not that hard to at least begin. Instead of a list of objectives, you can tell a 1-paragraph story that lets people know what they'll be learning,
Right.
I can give an example. Like, so-and-so's a doctor. He got a gift from a patient. He wants to look up her address so he can send a thank you note in the medical record. Is he allowed to do that? In this course, you'll learn whether so-and-so was allowed, to look up private information. And then at the end, did you learn? What do you think? It's just so easy. You can come up with a very short story to draw people in. Of course, you can get much more involved, but just for a quick, opener, it's easy.
Wow, that's great. I kind of did that with the accessibility in action. I did a e-learning. It was like it's a self-paced course I did in Genially. I'm not sure if you've used Genially. My students are actually really loving that. They use, Captivate. They use the traditional tools like that, and our Articulate Rise and Storyline and stuff like that. But lately they've been checking out Genially, which is something my students introduced me to, and it's an interactive tool. And so with each of my solo episodes now, I create an interactive tool or not a tool, but an interactive type of piece that can accompany that to help learners that maybe want to have a little bit more of that deep dive into it. So I created, for the accessibility one, I created a self-paced course. And at the very beginning, what you mentioned, I did didn't realize I did it at the time, but when you mentioned it, I did a story at the beginning. And then I had a little audio, it says listen, and then they got a little bit of that, dual coding, right? So they got to read it, and then it wasn't verbatim on the screen. I've learned that, try not to do verbatim. But then in the next screen, it had it didn't have the it had the objectives, but it wasn't like word for word. And then they got to click on something and get a little tip. So it had like a tooltip with it. So
cool.
yeah,
that's a great idea.
Yeah. So it's really neat. And what's nice is that Genially has all these, they have all these different templates that you can utilize. And then I just, massage it, and I take things, out and repurpose it. And so it's never what it truly was at the beginning, but that's okay because it's a template. So it's really neat. And then you just modify it to meet your needs. So it's a really fun tool, and my students have enjoyed doing that. And they had an assignment last week where they had to build an e-learning module, and it was for a fake XYZ type of tech company, and it was about privacy laws and things. So it was really fun, but they had to utilize AI as well to kind of get some of those policies and procedures. And so it was really fun for my students. And they're like, some of them, Connie, actually felt like they were cheating when they utilized the AI. And I said, you're not cheating. As long as you're, taking that as your first pass and you're not utilizing it as your one and only source, then it's okay. And you're doing the research and you're checking, the source information. But it was so funny because one of my students in her write-up, she said that. She said, I felt like I was cheating the whole time. And she even messaged me, and she's like, is it okay for me to use this? I just feel awkward. And I'm like, I get it. I understand. But look at it as your collaborative partner. That's what one of my guests said. And I was like, that's brilliant. I love that. Your collaborative partner. So yeah, I love that. So it was great because my students really got to see that process of going through that and doing that e-learning module and really utilizing the technology and not letting the tools replace that process, but coming alongside them to do that. So I love that because that brings that back around. Yeah.
That's a good assignment.
Yeah, definitely. They had another one too in this class that I think you would have enjoyed too, and they had to utilize AI, but it was about situational leadership and that model and being able to understand different readiness styles and working with other people. And I was like, this is great because for those K through 12 educators, they don't necessarily work with other employees. They work with other staff maybe at the school, but it was really interesting because they had to take the prompts for each readiness style and then put it into whichever tool. Most of them use ChatGPT, but then they had to work with that. And so they played the instructional designer, and then the AI tool played the employee, and they had to work through that and get them comfortable and go through that situation to get them to the next readiness level. So it was really interesting. And then they did a write-up on it. So nice. That was cool too. So it's a lot of fun to see where, those technologies are coming into place and how they're being integrated into our daily work as IDs as well. So that's neat.
I agree.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. So I've been doing this in some of my most recent episodes, so I figured we could do this too with the bonus questions. So I wanted to do something like that, and I know my listeners will enjoy it, and I can, create like a snippet for them. So what do you think is one tool, one habit, and maybe one reflection question you can recommend for those that want to land that first ID role?
Okay. One thing we haven't discussed yet is how important writing is. And I know when I finished my degree program, I was shocked. Number one, how I wasn't a great writer. And number two, how much writing was involved in instructional design. I mean, unless you're taking a completely technical route, which some people do, it's pretty shocking. So I think any tool that will help you make your work perfect, like a grammar tool, a spell checker, because when you create, let's say, writing for a manual or for e-learning, it often doesn't get checked well enough by other people on your team. Many instructional designers work alone, and many don't have, if they're on a team, they don't have funds for an editor. If you work for a publisher, you're going to have that. But it really is like working for a publisher. If you're working for a large organization, I worked for, I would freelance with a large hospital organization, like maybe 5, 6, 10,000 people could take your course. And if you have a few errors in it, it's just horrible.
Yes.
It just makes you feel awful when someone says, like 1 year later, I noticed these 3 typos. Why didn't anyone say it first?
Right.
So it's really like you're working for a publisher, whether you are or not. That's how good and perfect your work needs to be. And when I'm teaching these instructional design classes in my community, that's one of the big things that people aren't aware of. Because I wasn't either. You have to be super detail oriented. You can get through an entire graduate program and not be detail oriented. The professors don't get on your case for every little error. And so that to me is the number one thing. I would get a tool that finds your errors, that fixes your grammar and checks your spelling. And then you have to check, because sometimes they're wrong, the tools. So you have to check the tools, check what corrections. You can't just go through and say, yeah, correct it all. So that's one thing. For a habit, it's related. It's just like you really have to triple check your work. If your portfolio is filled with, even has a few misspellings and links that don't work, forget it. I mean, they have 50 other people who have a perfect one, or a few people who have it. It really looks bad. As someone who now knows how to be detail oriented, and that was not natural for me, when I see it, I go, no, you can't have somebody who does sloppy work. So I think that's just super important. Probably you have to get somebody else to check your work, because it's very hard to find your own mistakes. I can't find my own mistakes. I'll reread, and somebody will send me an email and say, oh, you have a typo here.
No, yeah, that's true. I've noticed that as well.
And that's with, a Grammarly check, a word check, I don't know how it happens. And then what was the third one?
And a question maybe that maybe they could ask when they're landing their first ID role, maybe like an interview, maybe it could be like an interview question, or maybe something that if they know someone in the field, maybe something they could ask that would help land them that role.
Let's see. One thing, I mean, when you're back again to the portfolios, when you're showing your work and demonstrating it, and designing it, you always have to think about, and you can talk about this during an interview too. There's a saying that people always say, and maybe you teach this, what's in it for me? That's what the audience is thinking, what's in this for me? So picture busy people. They're working all day. They have, they may be out in the field. They may be truck drivers. They may be office workers, but they're busy and they don't want to take compliance training that's only going to teach them rules and regulations that they may not think are relevant. So you have to find a way to make it so relevant to them that they understand what's in it for them. So when you can do that in your work and then talk about it in an interview, such as, I know that people may not want to do this training because it's compliance training. So I made sure that they could see how it was relevant to their jobs. So let's say you are working in you're creating training for someone who works in a factory. Well, one interesting approach could be have them go through the course as though they were the quality assurance person. And then when they see it from another viewpoint, it may make it more reasonable and understandable why they have to, be so careful when they're doing their production work in the factory. But you always have to find some angle that will make it interesting to them so that they actually are paying attention. Because most of the tests that we have at the end of e-learning, you can go through and pass without even taking a course. They're so easy because we don't want people to fail. So it's our own fault.
Right. It's that fail safe. Right. I love that. It's almost like thinking of, what you mentioned about coming at it from a different point of view. It almost makes me think of, being like a TV producer or movie producer, they want to try to think of who's my audience, what point of view am I trying to get across. Yeah, I love that. And bringing it from a different point of view that they may not think about, I think it makes it relevant, makes it interesting. And then it really helps them to say, okay, maybe, so workplace, mistakes or accidents from this. Yeah, I can understand why this is not a good thing, so we want to reduce it. So that's a great idea.
And
yeah.
Of course, you can also make games too that, simple games. I know we can't make complex games, but simple ones. I'm sorry, Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I agree with you. Games are really important. And because it's true, compliance training can be so dry. So how can we make it interesting and relevant? Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Those are great tips. Absolutely, for sure. So as we wrap up, are there any other top tips or advice for listeners who are looking to transition into instructional design or who are just starting out in the field that you'd like to share?
Well, maybe one other thing is that remember who your audience is in terms of looking at your portfolio. So it's going to be a busy manager who probably, or it could be a recruiter, but if it's a busy manager, and recruiters are busy too, they don't have the time to go through an entire course. So put yourself in their shoes. Imagine you're busy, you're looking at 25 portfolios. What would you like to see? You want it to be clear and concise, and you want to, if they're looking at your work, have it be, perfect. If they're looking, they don't want to just click next. I know we're usually making things for the learner, but in this case, we're kind of making things also for the busy manager who may be hiring you. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that not everyone, but many organizations are using systems that sort through and filter resumes by keyword. So keep that in mind too. Learn how those AI talent systems work. Those are 2 tips.
Yes, I like that. I teach my students in the capstone course because they finalize their portfolio. So I'm glad you brought that up because they finalize it and they have, and I'm supposed to look at it, make sure and it's funny because the final assignment that they have is where they have to click through, make sure things work, like you said, and make sure they've checked their spelling and grammar and things like that. And I'll get assignments sometimes where I look through their portfolio and I'm like, oh, there's obvious spelling mistakes. And it's just the visual design is just not, I'm like, I don't have a color blindness, but I have a visual impairment that makes it hard for me to see bright colors. It's just really hard on my eyes. So I'm like, wow. And I've seen some of my students work and the whole design of it. And I'm like, whoa, that's way too bright. You got to tone it down a little bit. So I give them that advice. But yeah, I agree that those are big things for sure. And then I go over the applicant tracking system with them and I show them a video of that. And so important. And now with AI, right, it's such a big component of that. So
one other aspect of visual design and accessibility is, you just reminded me of it, is contrast. You really have to have sufficient contrast so that people can read it. Because almost everyone has some kind of little disability somewhere. For me, it's contrast. I have to have enough contrast to be able to read it. You don't like bright colors. If you need sunglasses, then it's not a good design. So keep a lot of those things in mind and, make it kind of sophisticated and minimalist and neutral so that you're not impacting people's brains.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It's true. If I have to put sunglasses on, I know that's not a good sign. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, one time I was at the campus and they were having an event and they have this big Jumbotron TV, right? Cause it's in the arena, and they started showing this video and I couldn't watch it. I had to look away because it was so bright and just overwhelming. I was like, whoa. Yeah. And I'm like, I just can't handle it. I'm starting to get a headache. So I'm like, wow, that's such a good, good advice, for put yourself in the learner's shoes, right? And what they may need and what they may want. So that's great. I love that. Thank you, Connie, for all these insights that you shared today. So I know all your wealth of experience and your expertise are going to inspire all of my listeners. to come into this field and pursue their own path in instructional design. So, so I think that'll be wonderful for them. So glad we got connected and you had a chance to come on the show.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you. I never tire of talking about this stuff, sadly.
I think we could, yeah, it's funny because some people I've had on, they're like, oh, we could have talked for hours. And I'm like, I know. And then once I have someone on, then we're like, I always say, come back on the show again. Whenever you want, you're welcome to come back on. So I always lay out that perpetual welcome, Matt. So they're always, welcome to come back. And then people do, they reach out to me and are like, hey, can I come back on, to another time? And so it's really neat because I'm doing a series with a gentleman right now. His name is Russell Van Brockland, and he's a New York State Senate-funded dyslexia researcher. And so that's another area where I've learned a lot, Connie. It's amazing. He actually will do exercises with me in our episodes. And so I've done 3 parts with him, and he's coming back for part 4. We may have to do 5 because of just the complexity of what he's teaching. And he wants to break it down, make it simple. But yeah, it's really interesting because he's dyslexic and I'm not. So I'm learning through that. And so it's really neat to learn that. And it's not just for, what he's teaching me is mainly for kids that are in grade school, but it's like, wow, I had kids that I knew when I was growing up that had dyslexia, and the teachers just didn't know how to handle it. The parents didn't know how to handle that. And so it really brings that to mind of that. And so he finds their like or their dislike, and then he uses that as their as the element that he can, and he helps them find what book they like. A lot of them love Harry Potter. So he helps them with that. He gives them he says, get the audio version and the print version. And he helps them with that. But yeah, he did this exercise with me, and it was really interesting because he said, okay, Sally, she likes swimming, right? Okay. So put the like as the plus. And he's like, fill that in. Sally, does she like or dislike swimming? And I'm like, she likes it. And he's like, I'm going to test you, see if you did it right. And he said, no, you didn't do it right. And I was like, what are you talking about? I said, Sally likes swimming. And he's like, does she like or dislike it? I said, like, okay, put it in there. And I said, oh, I get it. He says, that's what a dyslexic person, they don't realize that they have to change the like to likes. They say Sally likes swimming, and then I have to correct. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I get it. So yeah, wow. So it was really interesting. And I don't know if there's adults that have that as well. I'm sure they do, because if they don't get the proper help, that you have dyslexic learners. So, but yeah, it was such an eye-opening experience for me. So yeah, so I'd love to have you back anytime on the show.
Thank you so much. It was really a nice conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Thank you for taking some time to listen to this podcast episode today. Your support means the world to me. If you'd like to help keep the podcast going, you can share it with a friend or colleague, leave a heartfelt review, or offer a monetary contribution. Every act of support, big or small, makes a difference, and I'm truly thankful for you.